to welcome you to our first combined in-venue and online CPD event. My name is Yolanda Morkel. I'm a senior lecturer at the Department of Architectural Technology at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT. Kathy and Brent of Cifa's CPD events team asked me to just do a short introduction. I need to acknowledge some key players without which this event would not have been possible. First is Cifa, who bravely took on this exciting and quite scary challenge to expand their CPD offering beyond the confines of these walls to practitioners across the country and as far afield as Namibia. Thank you, Kathy and Brent, for your patience. Also I need to Isa and the team downstairs for their keen collaboration and always friendly attitude. Then Saya for managing and supporting open architecture to provide alternative modes of learning and qualification since 2014. Through CPT's collaboration with open architecture, 13 part-time BTech working students graduated only 10 days ago. I'm very much delighted about it. We have an audience of about, well, we did make the count now. I was thinking about 50, but we've exceeded that number. And at the current count, it's 65. Thank you for being part of this pilot event. We're keeping our fingers crossed for the connectivity. I think that's what I'm most nervous about, is that we'll actually have people all over sitting and getting gobbledygook on the other side. We hope that we won't be disappointing anybody, and we rely on your critical and honest and frank feedback, and that goes for both the face-to-face and the online participants, so that we can improve in the future, and hopefully it will be the first of many such events. This event will be recorded, and we will decide what happens with that recording. But please, the guys online, if they disconnect, we want them to just not panic and just reconnect. Pedro is up in Joburg helping and supporting us. Online participants will see exactly the same presentation that we are seeing, and they will hear the audio. To limit data consumption, we're not using the webcam. We did try it, but we're not going to use it. Remote participants are encouraged to use the webinar question function. They will be asking questions and chatting. In fact, I will be chatting to them to make sure that they didn't put their dog at the computer and wanting to earn CPD points through that. We will make sure that they're actually paying attention. Of course, those of you who want to be fiddling with your cell phones, we can't do anything about that. In fact, if you are tweeting, we'd be happy. Right, so Pedro is the OA webmaster, and we will be providing online support from Johannesburg. And you may also see Professor Lone Paulson. She's the Program Director of Open Architecture. The online people will see her in the chat. I know she was at VITS for moderation, and she just joined. Right. In-venue and remote participants are encouraged to share comments, etc. I did already say that. Most folks have to twist the handle. Right. Now for the important part. Gallagher Lourens Architects, GLA, is a Cape Town-based firm from literally just down the road from here. They've been operating for just over a decade and passionate about their work, priding themselves in taking architecture in Cape Town and South Africa seriously. Directors Henk Lourens and Tina Gallagher are both UCT graduates. Henk will do the presentation supported by Tina on the technology. Coincidentally, just over half of the members of GLA's architecture team has strong links with CPUT. They have some employees who studied with CPUT, and Henk, of course, has been for many years been a part-time lecturer and currently still on and off moderating for us. So we have quite a special link. Director Tina Gallagher worked for esteemed practices locally and abroad, including Gunther Benisch in Stuttgart, Shepherd Epstein in London, Gap and Kruger West in Cape Town before starting her own practice in 2003 and joining forces with Henk soon after. Prior to starting up Gallagher Lourens Architects, Henk was involved in a number of private practices and spent 9 years with the City of Cape Town, the latter 5 as Chief Architect and Acting Manager of the Design Service Unit of the City. We look forward to learn about their 2 projects out of the 12 that received regional awards last year, and that will be considered for the National SIA Awards for Excellence later this year. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Henk.
Thank you very much. Must I wait for you? Is it ready?
No, you can carry on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Yolanda, for your kind introduction, and welcome to everybody here and, of course, those online participants. I'm very glad to see that there are some of our ex-staff members here, ex-note, and all people who have significantly contributed to the success of these projects. Firstly, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to present these two projects. As requested, this talk and the ensuing discussion will focus on the design process, the challenges and opportunities which presented during the process, and how these were optimized. And you must please excuse me, Yolanda said that she can't remember that short little bit. I've got piles of paper that I must try and remember, so I'm going to read quite a bit. The format of the presentation for both projects will be similar, and each will be followed with time for comments or questions. Both these projects are function-driven, the Hermanus CDC more internally and the bus depots more externally, but we hope to show how both, in the very eloquent and kind words of one of our clients, transcend mere functionality and brings value to the environments they inhabit. We will start with the Hermanus Community Day Center, which, as its name implies, is not a 24-hour health service facility, but operates during normal working hours only. Our client is the Department of Transport and Public Works of the Government of the Western Cape, who briefed us during 2010. The centre is both a consolidation and an integration of outpatient services previously provided by 3 facilities serving the Greater Hermanus area. These services include acute and chronic care, which is visited by sick and injured people, and patients with chronic conditions like diabetes who, over and above using medication, also have to manage their lifestyles. The mother and child services, which is self-explanatory. Infectious diseases care, which mainly dealing with patients suffering from TB and HIV, many who come for daily observed treatment. An oral health care or dentistry facility, physical rehabilitation and therapy, and a pharmacy. These are supported by an administration unit which includes patient records, help desk and sorting area, reception, security and staff facilities. The schedule of accommodation is quite extensive and requires complex relationships between departments and individual spaces. Typically, clinical areas are quite specific, with tried and tested requirements. However, the focus was on improving the spatial and functional qualities of these to provide for a healthier working environment for the staff and a healthier, less stressful experience for patients. To ensure the most effective and efficient rendering of services, the purpose and function of each clinical unit had to be clearly expressed and the relationship between functions organized in such a way as to facilitate clarity of movement and service. Patients spend the majority of their time at the facility waiting, whether in a pre-waiting area, main waiting, or sub-waiting areas. The client specifically required these spaces to be pleasant, filled with natural light, well ventilated with, wherever possible, natural ventilation, and with direct or visual access to the outside. The I-43, approximately 750 meters to the north of the site, is the main route into Hermanus and links a number of communities. The center of Hermanus is about 2.75 kilometers towards the east. Swydam Road links the site with the I-43, Schwelichle, and the New Harbour. This makes the center easily accessible to pedestrians from Mount Pleasant and Schwelichle, as well as for people using public transport and private vehicles. The Oorgestrand municipality did not allow any vehicular access off Swydam Road, but only from Gion van Wyk Crescent to the north of the site. The newly upgraded and extended Hermanus Hospital is about 1 kilometer from the site. Although Swydam Road is a busy feeder route providing access to public transport, it is a poorly defined street with unstructured semi-industrial and industrial buildings along part of its eastern edge, and loosely scattered buildings to the west. It is only at the intersection with Chrisani Street at the start of Schwedichlem that the first signs of community appear. The urban grain tightens significantly, and the intersection is marked by a partially formalized market. The site is located opposite this market at the northern end of the previous commonage. The remainder of the commonage is currently being developed with high-density housing. The eastern boundary of the site is defined by a high security wall separating it from an upmarket residential development. The center is organized. Are you battling there? Sorry, Tina, do we need a break? Sorry about that.
I think continue, then we'll sort that out.
Okay, the site is located. Sorry, where am I now?
Sorry.
The centre is organized around a number of courtyards, which become progressively more private and specific. The first and most public interface embraces the existing market to begin to form a civic space. This is strengthened by the main pedestrian entry to the centre and the placement of all administration and staff facilities along Swadam Road, adding definition to this edge. Tree planting and public seating continue this definition through the public square. The provision of a new drop-off and pick-up embayment on both sides of the road and the possibility of extended trading will help to increase activity and life of the space, which together with the extended roof of the administration building also functions as the pre-waiting area to the centre. Vehicular access with associated security and garaging for government vehicles are pushed towards the eastern boundary to leave the centre of the site for the development of the clinical wings, pharmacy, parking, and potential future expansion. The pharmacy shares the main waiting area with record and reception. The three clinical wings are orientated
The guys online are seeing the split view of the presented screen. That's not a problem. I can just see two slides at the top, so not to worry.
Right. The three clinical wings are oriented. Are you on the next one, Tina? Use the down and okay. I'll wait for you. Nothing to come more. Okay. To the south, oral health care and the infectious diseases unit, which both have to be accessible from the entry lobby for patients with pre-booked appointments and for patients receiving daily treatment. Both these units house their own reception and patient records. Acute and chronic care is close to the main waiting area with mother and child services and physical rehabilitation in the quieter northern wing. Those are the two at the northernmost end. The splitting of these buildings into two functional units each allows the main circulation spine to be positioned away from the administration staff facilities, forming four courtyards, each with its own specific character and function. The first is the main entry courtyard, a transition between the public square and entry into the building. Like the other three, it is protected from the prevailing southeastern and northwestern winds and offer options of sunny seating areas or shaded areas against the building or under trees. The second courtyard is an extension of the main waiting area and the central spine, offering reprieve during busy and noisy times of the day. The third courtyard is dedicated to the staff and accessible only from the staff tea room and meeting room. And the fourth courtyard is partly dedicated to the physical rehabilitation unit, with a number of obstacles to be negotiated during therapy sessions. It is also accessible from the central spine as a reprieve. Two further outside spaces. One is an outside waiting area for the infectious diseases unit, and a play area for children are developed close to these clinical units. The central spine, which also accommodates the generic functions of the help desk, the public facilities, and the main clinical preparation area, runs along the edge of these courtyards and can be interpreted as an extension of both the main waiting area and the outside courtyards, with windowsill seating below large shop fronts and planted roofs over the courtyard edge. The natural light from the courtyards and the articulation of the inner wall of the spine assist in orientating oneself within the building. It increases legibility and a clear progression from the public entrance to the more specific and private functions of the clinical departments. This is further extended into the clinical areas with the pools of natural light from the roof monitors announcing sub-waiting areas, each with visual links to outside landscaped areas. The Manus Community Day Center is a primary healthcare facility, and as such deals with the well-being of people in their daily lives. It does not represent our intention to design a building which is easy to relate to, warm and welcoming, and providing indoor and outdoor spaces with comfortable proportions. As such, the material choices form and scale of the building is less civic and relates more to a domestic architecture with abstract references to the vernacular. The rectilinear buildings are made of bagged and plastered brick load-bearing walls with double-pitched and hipped roofs and well-proportioned openings. The walls are stepped or thickened in places, sometimes to allow seating, to visually extend openings, or to receive intersecting elements. The roofs are manipulated to reflect a hierarchy of spaces and functions, and the often encountered dormers are reflected in the roof monitors. Openings on the northern edges of the buildings are well protected with overhangs to eliminate direct sun in summer, but to allow winter sun to penetrate deep into the building. The building is just less than 2,500 square meters large and occupies about 50% of the site, and the hard landscaping, including the parking area, about another 1,000 square meters. This left 1,500 square meters for soft landscaping. The intention was to use a palette of indigenous planting materials with ordered planting along Swadam Road and controlled planting in areas of close contact. The remainder of the site is hydro-seeded with the seed mix of coastal fynbos and pioneer plants with some specific species interplanted. These will hopefully establish within the next season. The natural wetland area to the north of the site was strengthened with some shaping and the seed mix and interplanting adapted to this particular microclimate. In closing, although humble and unpretentious, the building graciously addresses its neighbors and users and subtly reflects the landscape. Thank you. So I'll just move straight on to this.
Yes, I think let's get it.
The three bus depots which we will discuss today form part of the first phase of the City of Cape Town's integrated rapid transit system, now known as the MyCity project. Phase 1A was the pilot project for the rollout of an integrated public transport system throughout the metropole and concentrated on Tableview, Atlantis, Dunoon, the inner city, which includes Hart Bay, the airport link, and the connecting trunk routes. This project was also the first comprehensive project of its kind in the country to be fully implemented. Natalie, I hope I'm not telling lies. For this reason, very little local precedent was available to draw from, and the city, with its lead consultants, undertook extensive research in similar systems in South America especially. Although the brief for the depots was based largely on this research, the information was not specific and dependent on the modeling of the system to determine the numbers of buses and the number of and desirable positions for the depots. We were, however, put in contact with Victor Cordoba, a manager of one of the depots in Bogota, Colombia, who was a valuable source of detailed information, formulas for calculating the type and extent of facilities based on number of buses and frequency of service. So to a large extent, the brief for these facilities was developed whilst modeling exercises were ongoing, determining types and numbers of buses. The brief was interesting because it included a number of typologies, each with its own demands, all thrown together on one site. Many of these attract quite stringent technical and safety requirements. Amongst these were the bus approach to the depots, security checkpoints for buses and personnel, refueling, bus cleaning, both the chassis and the body and internally, staging or parking of buses, maintenance of buses, which included tire repairs, wheel balance and alignment, brake testing, mechanical repairs, body repairs, painting and touch-ups. Drivers' facilities and bus dispatch, and training facilities including mock-up station platforms. And then, of course, the administration thereof. As mentioned earlier, these projects are function-driven, and the success of the depots are dependent firstly on a seamless circulation of the vehicles, eliminating crossover points as far as possible, and with each functional relationship well resolved. Since the entire system is subject to operational peaks, the extent of individual functions of the depots were determined to avoid any bottlenecks when, during peak hours, a bus arrives at the depot every 2 to 5 minutes. It has to be processed before staging. When I say processed, it needs to be refueled, it needs to be washed and cleaned, and only then can it go into the parking area. Another complication was that during the design process, the city was still in consultation and negotiation with potential operators. These entities were still to be established from various taxi associations and the Golden Arrow Bus Company. Several presentations were made to the then unformed entities, but for obvious reasons, little direct input was received from the end users. We were initially briefed on the Stables Depot, also referred to as Potsdam or Noon Depot, in the beginning of 2009. However, to be able to have a limited service running for the 2010 Soccer World Cup, we were briefed on the Inner City Depot shortly thereafter. And that was for a temporary intermediate depot just to handle that service. The Atlantis Depot was confirmed in the course of 2011. Both the stables and the Atlantis depots were built on greenfield sites. The site for the Stables Depot forms part of a new industrial park development just off Potsdam Road and just beyond the last bus station on the Danune route. It is ideally located for the table view service. The extent of the site allows for the staging of approximately 250 buses, and this capacity can be reached only during the future expansion of the service towards the northern suburbs. The site does not front onto Potsdam Road, and since the original urban all fronted onto the private internal road of the industrial park, a new access to the site was negotiated with the city and the body corporate in order to avoid accessing via the existing development security. To the southwest of the site is the informal settlement of Dürnbach, separated from the industrial park with an existing 3-meter high wall. Sorry. In Atlantis, city land was identified in the Atlantis Industrial Development Area. On a planned My City route, you have to press the space part, belonging and along Karl A. Street and next to land belonging to the Golden Arrow Bus Company. This is partially developed as a depot servicing the Sibanye service. This site, which is the smallest of the three, sits on a fairly busy intersection on the edge of the buffer zone between the industrial and residential area. The southern street edge along Christopher Stark Road is lined with an avenue of protected eucalyptus trees, but both street edges required some form of definition. The inner city depot is a part conversion of an existing long-distance bus depot with new facilities added. On a restricted site with restricted vehicle access and some historical content which required an archaeological watching brief. It occupies the street block between Prestwich Street, the Helen Suzman Drive Elevated Freeway, Napier Street, and Bennett Street to the north. The site contained a number of scattered and badly maintained buildings. Only 2 buildings were worth retaining. It is located in a sought-after commercial part of town, with 3 to 4 story buildings along most of the opposite street edges. To the southeast is the Prestwich Primary School, with the school gates facing the depot and where kids arrive and leave on foot or by public transport. During school term, large groups of kids wait on both sides of the road in the afternoon. The organization of the functions on the site was largely dictated by the movement of the buses. Since we drive on the left side of the road, the movement needs to be in a clockwise direction to eliminate a crossover at the entrance-exit points. Some functions are constant for every bus arriving at the depot, and the others happen at planned intervals. The administration buildings were not strictly tied to the circulation. Although in the case of Stables and Atlantis, it also accommodates the driver's facilities and the dispatch office, also referred to as operations. These buildings do, however, form the interface with the public or street and offers the only pedestrian and staff access to the facility. The exception here again is the inner city depot, where the separation of administration and operations made it possible to also separate the staff entrance from the administration building. We were able to use the administration building together with the entrance security building at Stables Depot to form the entrance court. This court extends the queuing distance for buses arriving during peak hours, accommodates a turnaround point for buses at the end of the route, and acts as a public interface for the depot. At the Atlantis Depot, these 2 buildings are placed along the boundary of Christopher Stark Road to strengthen this edge. At the inner city depot, the administration building sits along the more dominant Prestwich Street, providing a much needed definition to the corner closest to the existing developments in the street. Due to the narrow streets around the site and the difficulty of maneuvering and queuing buses in these busy streets, together with a resultant danger to pedestrians, a new access to the site had to be found. The road reserve under the Helen Suzman Elevated Freeway provided the opportunity to link the depot directly into the city via the Buitengracht-Hansstradom Boulevard intersection. The City of Cape Town's IT system strives to deliver a high-quality, efficient and scheduled public transport system. These concepts of high quality and efficiency are key principles guiding the brief for the entire built infrastructure of the system. Although these depots are seen as public buildings, they are operated by private companies and are not accessible to the general public. They did, however, require an identity and a public face. The architectural language required a palette which could address the industrial and robust nature of the depot as a whole, and in particular those buildings associated with the servicing of vehicles. It also had to allow manipulation to meet the more refined requirements of an administrative headquarter and its urban interface. In response, a language with clear, uncluttered identity was developed, one which could equally address the varied context and interfaces. The combination of the same robust and durable materials throughout achieved a clean and attractive contemporary aesthetic, whilst the form and rhythm of the components changed to meet the specific demands of the various functional components. The majority of the buildings on each site relate directly to the servicing of buses and require fairly large uncluttered spaces, many open on the sides. These are roofed with simple metal roofs, folded down on the weather side for some protection. Support facilities are accommodated in lower, simple buildings, which slide under or alongside these large roofs. This principle was extended and manipulated throughout. And in every instance, the major functions are expressed as a concrete frame with a folded roof over. In the administration buildings, this is further expressed with a dual grid which allows the glazed facade to read independent from the main structural support system. At the inner city depot, where some existing buildings were retained, this uncluttered language is able to comfortably sit alongside these and the general context. Here, the roofscape of the extended maintenance building was altered to respond to the existing roofs, whilst the existing heritage building, which previously was a series of 7 very deep storage sheds, is now converted into office space and staff facilities. To facilitate light penetration and ventilation, courtyards were inserted in every alternate bay and openings in the front facade restored to its original positions. In all 3 projects, careful consideration was given to the orientation of the buildings, mindful of the responsibility to lessen the impact on resources. However, with cleaning of buses on a daily basis, each requiring about 500 litres of water, this was the one area where the greatest impact could be made. All 3 depots are equipped with a water recycling plant. The soapy, dirty water is fed into a number of tanks with different biodigesters, which through a natural biological process recycles approximately 94% of the water used. In the case of Atlantis and the inner city depots, the 6% required to top up the supply is drawn from rainwater storage tanks either on roofs or underground. And then finally, just some interior views. Thank you very much. All right, we'll go into a question session. So, and we'll do it first for the, how do you call them, face-to-face attendees? The live audience. And when you do ask a question, I'm requested to repeat your question so that those online can also hear it. And then after that, we will take some questions from the online participants. Yes. All right. Are there any questions or any comments? Compliments.
That's always welcome.
Kathy? Which one came first? Well, look, obviously the traffic engineers were very involved. Oh, sorry. Thank you. The question was, to what extent did the traffic engineering impact on the design of the depots or the organization of the depots? Obviously, the traffic engineers were heavily involved in determining, first of all, the routes for the bus services, and they're all part of the transport unit within the city. So that was determined first of all, and with that the most ideal location for the depots. You would also note that in some cases we've made a specific attempt to push the depots into the site, like at the stables depot, to allow for some space for queuing of buses, because that's the biggest problem is, when a whole string of buses arrive every 2 minutes, and the processing period inside takes too long, you are going to get a queue of buses waiting to get into the depot. All of that is based on how many stations you've got to service the buses as they come in, and what the frequency of arrival is, and then what the length of the queue might be outside the depot. At stables it was quite a critical issue, and at the inner city depot it was quite an issue. And there, the moving of the access point for the depot to under the boulevard or the overhead freeway assisted us to create a length in which buses can queue before they enter the depot. At Atlantis, and Natalie, you must correct me if I'm wrong, the frequency of buses are further apart, and there was not that much pressure, but there was some traffic engineering that had to be done in moving the curb to allow for a bypass lane in the road. So yes, it did have an impact on the design. Internally, not really. Internally is a standard operation. We obviously work together with our lead consultants, which in both cases were civil engineers, and they each have their own traffic engineering component. So it was a matter of making sure that the flow of the buses would be good, that the turning circles are big enough, that a bus can in fact park in the parking bay that you've drawn on a piece of paper. So yes, to that extent it did play a fairly large role in shuffling things and making sure that everything fits on the site. It was quite, you might have noticed that in the layouts that the parking system used at the stables depot and at the inner city depot differs from the one used at Atlantis depot. Because Atlantis depot is the smaller site, it accommodates about 100 buses, just under 100 buses. The site area is, I think, if I remember correctly, about 20,000 square meters. In comparison with the inner city depot, which is about 26,000 square meters, also for about 100 buses, and the stables depot, which is about 48,000 square meters, for eventually 250 buses. But at Atlantis, because of the squareness of the site and it being a very restricted site, we had to change the parking system to a straight line of buses instead of the herringbone parking that we used elsewhere. So there are less driving area and more parking area. They just need to manage the buses a bit better then. Any other questions? Yes. The question was whether the lead consultants, the civil engineers, were the principal agents. We had two different lead consultants. The stables and Atlantis depots were one lead consultant who subcontracted the principal agent duties to the project managers. And in the inner city depot, the lead consultants retained the principal agency duties. I was asked whether that worked for us. I prefer not to answer the question. Any other questions? Yes?
Just in terms of the materiality of the project, firstly, I guess, which of the three depots came first?
All right. The question was which of the three depots came first. It was the stables depot that we were briefed on first. But we were virtually immediately after we were briefed on the stables depot, and after we basically went through the initial exercises of getting the site organization sorted out, when there was a rush to try and get the 2010 World Cup sorted out, which was with a limited fleet, and the most ideal location for that would have been the site of the previous long-distance bus depot, a site which at that stage did not belong to the city, it belonged to Praza. So we were briefed on that. So I suspect that your question is leading on to how that influenced the materiality of the buildings. It certainly did play a role, I think. Whether it did it subconsciously or whether we consciously made that decision, I am not quite sure. From the beginning, we wanted to use robust materials, so off-shutter concrete was one of the options. We weren't quite sure as to how well the drivers would be trained, so we wanted to make sure that the columns remained standing if a bus should collide with it. So we wanted to use concrete in the support structures of whichever building we might be dealing with. But there were large wall surfaces which we also wanted to just make sure would at least resist wear and tear over a longer period of time, and of a darker material as well. And that decision was made quite early. But I think when we started working on the inner city depot and looking at the context, the choices became easier for us.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You've almost got two buildings. You've got an industrial shed type, and then you've got office college.
Yes.
It's quite interesting to play between materiality, especially in terms of the context of that portion of the Greenpoint.
Yes.
Basically, it's got a lot of accommodation, office combination. There's also a lot of industrial shed that we reused.
Yeah.
So I was really interested to know a bit of that, kind of that site. I mean, did you replicate that, or just was it an extension of the other two sites?
Sorry, do you want me to repeat that whole thing? Okay, this is still leading on to this whole discussion about materiality and the makeup of the context in Greenpoint and how that might have influenced it with office buildings and with semi-industrial buildings and shed-like buildings. I think the nature of the projects are in fact exactly that. They are kind of industrial buildings. They're not heavy industrial buildings. You can call them light industrial buildings. They're partly commercial. So that was what the grain of Greenpoint to a certain extent still is, or parts of Greenpoint. I don't think it influenced us in the way in which we broke up the buildings. But where it certainly did play a role, I think, or I suspect, is in the materiality of the buildings. In the inner city site, we made a conscious effort to deal with the roofs a bit differently in some areas than what we did elsewhere, where we felt it necessary to do so. But where we felt that what was designed elsewhere could sit comfortably on that site, that's the way we went. I must also tell you that the inner city depot was a far more complex one than the other two. Partly because it sits on an existing built-up site with existing buildings that we partly had to retain, but also because during the whole process it was broken up into virtually 3 phases. The 2010 phase, which only dealt with a very tiny portion of the site, where we started working, and that was more or less a lick of paint in places and a little bit of fixing up here and there.
Adjacent to a working...
Yes, adjacent to the working depot, the long distance depot still had to operate. And they were not friendly neighbors. And then subsequent to the the other depot leaving, the long distance depot leaving, we had to retain the operations of the new My City little depot and develop the site around that in bits and pieces. So the construction moved around the whole site. The original plan was also to house all of the administration in the previous sheds, or what we call the historical building or the heritage building. But whilst I think it was virtually immediately after the contract had been awarded to the contractors that the city had kind of concluded its negotiations with the operators. And the operators demanded a new administration building. They were not going to sit in the sheds. So the admin building was then added. So what we initially wanted to do is just to landscape that edge, also as a bit of a break from what happens in the rest of the street. But if we had to add an administration building, then we wanted to add it as close as possible to where the existing buildings were in the street, and to still maintain a reasonable break with some landscaping. So it was a complex exercise working on the site with a whole lot of players and interactions at the same time. The only sad thing for us on that depot is that the landscaping was not quite fully developed to the extent that we wanted it to be developed. So hopefully, these things grow, so we must just wait and hopefully they will do well. Any more questions from the floor? Yes? Well, our client is sitting behind you, and they have, sorry, I must repeat the question. The question was whether there will be more depots and whether the city is planning to expand the service. Well, the city is already in the phase 2. The service is running. I think it is limited, but it is running from temporary stations and making use of existing facilities. They invited tenders from consultants on the design of the system, of the design of the infrastructure for that expansion into phase 2A, I think it is called. And they've broken the tenders up into 3 different pieces. There was one for the civil infrastructure, one for the stations, and one for the depots. We were unsuccessful in all 3 of those. So there are other consultants appointed to deal with those. Yes, Dominic.
After you came back from South America, seeing, obviously you saw operationally how they work, but how did your interpretation of our local context, and maybe also after doing some of the initial depots, how did that influence your changing of the depot itself? Particularly sort of people in the depot and how people work here and use space.
All right. The question was, after we returned from South America, how did that influence? How did our local context influence? Yes. How did our local context change our perceptions of how the South American depots function? Firstly, we never went to South America. The client did, and the lead consultants did, and they did that long before we were appointed. So there was a whole lead-in process with the lead consultants on the civil infrastructure design, and I think the stations as well. And the bus depots we were only appointed to deal with the bus depots at a later stage. So we were just provided with some photographs. Our friend Victor in Bogota sent us some drawings of the depots, plans and elevations, and sent us some schedules of accommodation, all of it in Spanish, which we sat with a dictionary and translated to try and figure out what the hell goes.
He's lying, we did use Google.
to figure out what the hell goes on. The one thing that did strike us from the depots in South America is that the maintenance buildings, the buildings in which they service the vehicles, are all open structures. Some of them are just those tensile structures. But that is a climatic thing. That would never work in our southeastern or northwestern winds and rains. So in our case, the buildings had to be more enclosed. They had to be a bit more solid. We had to control sun to a larger extent.
And the washing facilities?
Yes, and the washing facilities, they were, sometimes they used automatic washers, but they also used manual washing. But that was just in the open. They didn't need to have a cover over. It was just they parked the bus, and they had this stellasi that they climbed on with a broom, and they washed the buses, and they go and park them. And I think that, once again, it's a climatic thing. They subtropical, almost tropical, so they get their showers, and then it's over and done with, and everybody carries on with life. Cape Town, you won't be able to wash a bus for 7 days at a time. So we had to change quite a bit of that to be able to accommodate.
And also because of the labour.
Yeah, and because of the labour. All of these depots, none of them have an automatic washer. We had to design the wash bay so that they can install, or there's space for an automatic washer to be installed. But all of them use labour still to wash. But I don't think our health and safety requirements would have allowed this yellow piece of scaffolding that they dragged around on the concrete to get on top of the bus. So we also had to have more permanent structures for staff to be able to work. Yes, you certainly may.
Did Columbia also deal with recycling of water and rainwater?
The question is whether Columbia also dealt with rainwater use and water recycling. I have no idea. No. It is something that we introduced with the help of our mechanical engineers into the whole system.
On their side.
Yeah, we couldn't see anything on their side. So. It's a pity that it is also, because it's a new project, these things develop as you carry on. And when we were working on the stables depot, the big concern at that stage was environmental issues. So there was quite a strict environmental plan for that whole industrial park, and how to deal with runoff water and so forth. And we thought of rainwater collection, but that site is so big and the buildings are so far apart that you have to collect a little bit here and a little bit here and link the whole lot together. That we pushed the water into the stormwater system for this industrial park, which has a water polishing facility right at the back before the water runs out into the stream. I can't remember the name of the stream now. But anyway, it runs into the stream after it's been polished. It is something that is not always that well maintained, but that is the industrial park's problem. So we concentrated then rather on recycling of the water that we use, so that we don't have to use more water that will go to waste, or that we will not have to rely that heavily on rainwater collection. When we got to the Atlantis depot, it was a lot easier because other than the administration building, which sits separately on its own, and the roof over the entrance, all of the other buildings have interlinked roofs, and they all drain into a water collection system, which pumps up into a rainwater storage, a series of rainwater storage tanks from where the water supply is augmented. And the same, just to a large extent, the same thing happens at the inner city depot, where there were also very stringent water or stormwater runoff management requirements. I can't remember now what the name of the new laws. SADS, yes. Where you have to make sure that the water is cleaned before you dispose of it in the stormwater system in a city. And there are intricate system of underground water cleaning, filtration systems. The whole parking area where buses park has got a permeable paving with a storage space underneath it, from where the water is going through a system of filtration before it goes out into the stormwater system, the city stormwater system. But quite a lot of that water is also retained and pumped back into storage tanks after it's been filtered. Yes.
Was it actually part of your brief, or was it something which came up?
The question is whether that was part of our brief. It wasn't in the beginning part of the brief. We were asked, however, to consider all kinds of potential green principles. The electricity usage on these projects are not. It wasn't feasible to deal with too much solar power. The usage during the day is very little, and the pressure is at night, so we would have had to have extensive battery banks to deal with the requirements. So we investigated a couple of options, and this was the obvious one that came to the fore. So I won't say it was us, but it was definitely within the team of consultants. The decision was made that let's explore this avenue. But obviously also there is requirements from the local authorities that kind of guide you in that direction also. Yes. Yes?
How have the buildings been received by the communities around it? And I know essentially from the operator side there were security concerns around, especially with labels and the position in an informed settlement. How can we fit you down the line now? How's it going?
All right, Carmen, you wanted to know how these buildings have been received by the respective communities. Knowing that in the beginning there was a bit of resistance, but it's now a few years down the line, so what has happened? I think they've been received remarkably well. We just recently went on a round of inspections to all three of these depots for final completion. And I will start with the best one, which is Atlantis Depot. The community is incredibly proud of this depot, and we found some staff members working in the depot that tell you the story of how they've watched this thing happening, and they've been wondering what it was, and the moment that it started taking form and they realized what was happening, they made sure that they're going to get a job here because this is a place where they want to work. So from the community in general, there was great acceptance. From the staff that work at the depot, at that particular depot, there is huge acceptance. You can go there at any time of the day or night. Everything is spotlessly clean and in working condition. It's well maintained, the hedges are clipped, the plants are maintained, they get new compost every few months, everything is just like it should be. The other two depots are generally in a good condition. They are being looked after. But they have their stresses and strains. The inner city depot is a rough place to be in. So especially in the restored building, not so much restored building, in the repaired building, that takes a bit of a knock, but that is also that building also houses all of the staff facilities. So it's difficult to keep an eye on it and to make sure that everything is always clean. So we understand all of that. The administration building is fine. The security also takes a bit of a knock. And then at stables, everything seems to be okay. It's not perfect. It's not as good as Atlantis, but it is perfect, or reasonably perfect. There was a concern from the operator side about security. The security fence has now come down, eventually, the hoardings. The building was upgraded to make them feel a little bit more secure. And we were worried during the recent unrest in Dunoon that it might become a target. But it seems like that poor last station on the route is the one that takes the beating. It's just around the corner. It's literally, I think, 50 meters from the depot. But that takes a serious beating. But nothing has happened at the depot yet.
And the community use the soccer facilities quite a lot. They are the depot.
So Tina was just saying that the community or the depot allows the kids from the local community to use the recreational area that was made for the drivers whilst they sit between shifts. So it seems like they've got a fairly good relationship with the community. Just to go back to the clinic, if you want to add that into the mix as well, because that is always the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in how the community accepts it and how they deal with it and how the staff deals with the building. And on a visit to the clinic some time ago, and chatting to the sister in charge, she mentioned that in fact, I think what happened was that I saw people walking in with pick and pay bags, and she said to them they can just go and put it in the office. So I made this little silly comment, oh, are you having a party here later? She says, no, those are just volunteers from the Mount Pleasant community who on occasion bring food, which we store in our storeroom, and when one of the nurses report a patient that doesn't have money for food, then we provide them with food out of that storeroom. And that's not all. You might have seen in the staff room there were 3 ladies without uniforms. They are from the Schwellichli community, which has a whole organization of women who sent 3 ladies to help clean the clinic every day. And it's just to assist the staff of the clinic, because obviously the staff cannot get everywhere. So they've got 3 ladies from the community that come to clean or help clean the clinic, and the clinic is spotlessly clean, absolutely clean, and organized, and there's flowers, and there are boxes for suggestions and all kinds of things.
And the flowers come from the garden.
And the flowers come from the gardens, yeah. So, and then on top of that, she says, there's also from the traditional Hermanus community, there's also an organization of women who know that the administration of the clinic must be difficult. It was 3 clinics that were thrown together. So this organization sends 2 women also on a daily basis to come and help with the capturing of patient records. So they sit at the back there in the records room behind a computer, and they capture patient records and digitize it and so forth. So the whole community have come together to find a way of supporting the clinic, because they just love being there. So yeah, I think they've all been reasonably well accepted.
That is an online question as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were asked to comment about the roofs of these buildings that seem to have a common theme of a bit of a sculptural quality. Firstly, thank you for the compliment. Gosh, Tina, how do I answer that question? Look, in the clinic, it was relatively easy to get there. It's always easier to motivate from something that was kind of pushed onto you. We had to have a roof space. We had to have a pitched roof, simply because of stuff that happens inside that roof, which is still not perfectly resolved. But also, it sits in the Southern Cape, which traditionally has pitched roofs. It provides you with the insulation that you require. People have done it for this year, so why would we go and reinvent the wheel? But what, however, is both the double pitched roofs and the hip roofs that you find in the area. What we did, however, do is to try and manipulate the ridge of the roofs, to move them sideways to see whether we get a better configuration, a better response to what is north and what is south, a better penetration of light into the courtyards, to get the monitors in a place where it sits above the waiting rooms at the bottom. So all of that played a role in exactly how the roofs were manipulated on the double pitch roofs. On the hip roof, which is only over the main waiting area, the reception, and the pharmacy, that is the main center of the building. That is the place where everybody needs to go to. So we wanted to make that clear and lift that roof up, or pull it up, so that it is obvious when, it doesn't matter from which side you arrive, you would automatically go to the highest roof in the building. That must be the most important place. And it's working that way. So there we also then manipulated the ridge of that hip roof to pull it sideways until it sits over the main waiting area. So over the pharmacy, it's just a long sloping roof, and it's all concentrated over the main reception area. With the depots, it was really just a matter of trying to find a cover over a very wide open space. And yes, you could possibly just put a flat roof on top of it with all of the complications that come with that. But we also needed some side cladding, especially towards the north or the northwest, to protect, because these roofs are quite high. They're about 6 meters high. And to protect people that are working inside there, and to protect the buses whilst they are parked there. We could never protect them 100%, but we could at least give them some more protection. So the fold in the roof came from there to both act as a vertical cladding and as a roof cover. But that would be, use the word dumb. We introduced a further ridge in the roof to bend the roof as well, so that it would read more as a fold over those larger spaces. And then we just extended that idea to all of the buildings. So that answers it well enough, I hope. Any more questions? Or Yolanda, do you want us to take questions from your online participants?
Yes, we've dried up on this side. Okay. I'm going to unmute both of us. Right, there's been just compliments galore online, and special messages to you from people saying how they've enjoyed it, that you can look at later. Louette Weiss is a UCT master student. She's saying that she's using the Hermanus Day Center as a case study in her research. She had a question related to the roof, so I think that was answered very well. I asked Arthur Barker to ask a tricky question. A former colleague of yours. He said yes, Arthur. He said, asked a typical.
Arthur Barker question.
Yes. If you had to do a self-critique, let me get the exact wording. I don't misquote him. Basically, yes, he first said, I'm naughty. I said, yes, I know. Here goes, excellent presentation to the company, to the firm. What aspect of the Hermanus clinic would you change, or how would a self-critique affect any future clinic design? Arthur, Henk is shaking his head.
Arthur, that is a typical question to be expected from you. And if I knew that you were online, I would have handed the microphone to Tina immediately. What would we do differently? Look, we are hoping to do another one of these clinics, probably the same size. But, you know, what we have realized is that obviously there are two levels or two aspects to the problem that needs to be resolved. The first one is to get the thing to function properly. And secondly, it is to give some expression to these buildings that reflect its context and reflect what it means in a community. We think that on the latter, in this particular building, we did reasonably well. As far as the functioning of the clinic is concerned, I think there is room for improvement. Exactly where I'm going to find it difficult to tell you, but there are certain aspects of it that isn't quite fully resolved, I think, as far as the functioning of it is concerned. Please tell me that I've answered it well enough.
So perhaps we can, Arthur can just say yes or no. I can always get Henk back to continue. Right, excellent answer. Thanks, Arthur. Arthur was saying this. Right, then there were some questions related to choice of materials. Anya Veal asked what were the constraints, and there was also a question from Hugo Marcelo, and then Unga Marinana also asked a linked question related to that concerning working for government and budget constraints. So how did cost, budget, and material choice work together?
Well, I suppose this refers to all the projects. Yes. None of these projects had royal budgets. They were all pretty tight. And we had to manipulate things quite a bit to make it fit. I think, you know, in all cases, our clients were very open to suggestions, were very open to experimentation sometimes. For instance, in the Hermanus clinic, when the tenders came in originally, we were over the budget. And we were asked to make cuts. Now, we all know that the simplest way to cut on a budget is to cut off the building. So, but that wasn't allowed. So we had to find ways in which we can reduce costs. And one of them was with a flooring material, which is was always a typical build-up of a surface bed with a screed, with tiles, or with vinyl or whatever on it. So that, you know, the materials were never royal materials. There were no fancy tiles or anything like that. So we decided to, in the large public areas, to strip off the tiles or vinyl, to take away the screeds, and to be left with just the concrete, which we then polished to expose the aggregate. It's the first time that the Department of Public Works and Transport considered this option, but they allowed us to do it, and I think the result was fine, and they are certainly considering it for future clinics. It did save us quite a bit of money, but not enough. We had to do some more exercises to get within the budget. But they were, you know, they were quite keen to allow us to explore ways of still building the kind of buildings that we wanted to build, or that we suggested would be good to build. And to be able to do that, they allowed us to experiment a little bit with materials. None of these buildings are, in fact, untraditional buildings. The Hermanus Clinic is mostly a load-bearing brickwork building with a standard timber roof truss on top and metal roof sheeting. So there's nothing too extraordinary about it. With the depots, it's slightly different, and there, it was the robustness of the facility that we needed to deal with, and we had to take the best materials that we could possibly to be able to do it.
Then next, there was a question Jock Barnett asked about local labour, whether that played any role in the design, the use of local labour.
I think the fact, sorry, I don't have to repeat the question any longer. The fact that we've designed these buildings mostly as load-bearing brickwork buildings meant that, for instance, at the Hermanus project, there was no real specialized labor required. And the contractors had a very good relationship with the local community. And I can't remember the figures, but they mainly used local labor from the Schwellichtle community to the largest extent, and then some from Mount Pleasant, or even from, what is that little village? Austin. But it was all pretty standard building technology that was employed. There were obviously a couple of items that had to be brought in from Cape Town, but that was a minor portion of the building. So I think, if you decide to build a building that is reasonably humble and that is to be seen as part of the community, then that just comes naturally. You design it in a way so that the community can be part of it, and that they can relate to once the thing is completed. With the depots, it was a similar thing, except that there's a lot of concrete work, but the contractors used local labor from Atlantis and from Dunoon, and in the inner city depots, perhaps the only one where there was no local labor available, so they had to import their labor from outside of the city.
Thanks, Henk. Another question asked by David Hoffman. He doesn't know whether it's intentional or not, but he noticed in the window mullion spacing, he saw Mondrian. That's great.
Well spotted.
Typical artist comment. Right, and then, just need to mute you quickly. There was a question related to time frame. Janita and Shal both asked, what were the deadlines? Was it tricky? How did you negotiate the project duration from inception to, and that goes for both, to completion, yeah.
Look, the Hermanus Center were commissioned in 2010, and the completion date was the end of 2014. We weren't pushed too badly. Obviously, it's a financial issue, because the longer the contract, the more the client has to. So they were quite keen to get it finished if they didn't have a facilities. They had 3 different clinics, which were still in operation. They were not the ideal situations, but they could stay on there until such time that this building was. It's not. Look, there was an overrun on time, and I can't remember exactly. I think finally, probably about on the total program. It was a more it was more critical that those depots came into operation at certain times to be able to support the implementation of the service. We were ahead with one of them. I think the Atlantis depot stood there for maybe about 6 months or so before the operators took occupation of it. But that was also just as a result of a hiccup in negotiations with the operators. It wasn't really because the service was slow. So those were all commissioned from beginning of 2009, and I think the was completed in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, beginning quite quickly. Contract periods of around about 12 months. The clinic's contract period, I think, was 18 months.
Before you start, I think we will wrap up, but the very final question is actually from my husband, who's also an architect. I thought I was hoping we wouldn't join, but he's in Stellenbosch. He asked that if you, is there anything on any of the two projects that you felt that you wish that you had achieved, that you wanted to, but it didn't work out, or the client didn't buy it, or you regret not doing in the end?
Short answer is no.
Don't get yourself into trouble.
No, as I said, we had fantastic clients on both projects. There were, you know, for the bus depots, the client, and that was before Natalie arrived, and then Natalie arrived as well. But before Natalie, we had to deal with Ron Hayden, and I don't know who of you know Ron Hayden. He's an incredibly enthusiastic man, and he wants to get the best possible out of whatever little piece of grain he's got. So he inspired us to try and do better and better and better, and was always excited about a new suggestion. So it was easy to work with that particular client, and with a provincial administration also. You know, they've got a group of people that are architects. They also have clients that they have to service. They are the Department of Health is their client, so they kind of caught in between. They have to try and not be too nasty to us, but they also have to be very kind to the Department of Health. And they have to gauge what will be accepted by health and what will not be accepted by health. But they were all very enthusiastic about the project. They were all very keen to see something that would mean something to the community, that would be a better facility for people to work in and people to be seen in. They've never asked us to not do something. They've always just asked us to try and do better. That if you came to them with a suggestion, they would always, that makes sense, of course, they would be very keen to implement it. So, no, there's absolutely nothing that any of the clients did or asked of us that I regret not being able to implement.
Thanks, Henk. I'm going to hand over to Kathy to do the official thank you.
Thank you very much for listening.
Yes. Yes. Hello, everyone online and everyone here. I'm extremely pleased with tonight's event. It's our first online webinar, CPD at the same time. It's fantastic. 65 people, 14 here. That's 100. That's a fantastic turnout. Henk, thank you so much. And Tina for all the dry runs and the patience with the technology. Still a bit beyond us, but we'll get better and better. Please spread the word. The more people doing this, the more we can do it. Thank you very much.